Welcome back, everyone. In this week's video, we are going to be finishing these moon vases. We're going to trim this one with a foot and this one without a foot, and we're going to be using the chuck system to get these centered and trimmed. So if that's something that you want to see, stick around and find out how we do it. We're going to be trimming this one first without a foot, and we're going to be flipping it upside down and putting it into something called a chuck. Now, the reason why we put it in a chuck is because the rim, you can see, is not perfectly level, and it's a little delicate, so we can't flip it upside down and keep it balanced. So we put it in an object like this. But the downside of these ceramic chucks are many, and I talked about it in a previous video. So I'm going to be using something a little more common, which is easier for everyone else. So we'll take this out of the way, and we're going to be using a bucket. And the bucket I have is a 1-gallon bucket filled with water for weight. You can wad it down if you'd rather do that, or you can put optics in here that's heavy. So I'm not going to need to wad it down. And to ensure that this is extra stuck, what I'm going to be using is something called a Batmate. And so this is made by Exime. This is just chamois material, and you just usually use this to put down onto your wheel head to stick bats to, so it doesn't move. You can center on it, you can trim on it, and for this purpose, for this video, I'm going to be using it to secure and ensure that the bucket doesn't move. And so there's little holes here that line up with the standard 10-inch wide pegs. You set that down, and we're going to be using the bucket because this is a lot more common and it's wider, and for me this is a little more secure in my opinion. So we get our wheel, we put this on top, put the bucket on, and then we spin. We make sure that this is centered. So every time it touches my hand, I know that's where it's off center, so I shift it. So the downside of using these Batmates is you can't really tap center a bucket, so you just have to slowly get into center. So that looks pretty good. And then I can either just flip my piece directly over onto this, or I can take it a step further and put some sort of material on here so it sticks. And I actually have another Batmate, smaller one. So this is the 14-inch, this is the 12-inch. And so I'm going to put this on so that it can stick. You could use any tacky material, or even like paper towels would work. But I like these Batmates. I saw people use plastic before, or like cotton. But this material, to me, is a little more sticky. So I'm going to take my piece, and this will help not only keep this stuck, but it'll also protect it from the hard plastic. And so I set it down inside, and then from here, I basically center. So I'm going to go ahead and then shift the camera so you can see this a little better, and we're going to get another device to help us center this so we can start trimming. Before I start trimming this, I want to set up my barrier because this will cause all the trimmings to fly off because it's so elevated. And so I have these plastic clips here that have a little slot, and this was 3D printed. And this is a really good tool to create so I can have this barrier, which is just oak tag or thicker material. And what I do is I slide it into those little grooves, and that way it provides me a little barrier so that my trimmings will go in here rather than the ground. So I'm going to set that up so that I have this little protection, and now I can go ahead and center this guy and start trimming. So let's change the camera angle one more time, and then we'll get started. All right, so I am ready to start getting this centered, and normally you would just spin the wheel, figure out where it is low, and then tilt it to get it centered. But I learned from one of my students that you can use some technology to help you. And on my phone, I have an Android, and I have this bubble level app that can help. For the iOS, the Apple people, this is built into your measuring app. So basically what you do is you want to make sure that the circles line up within each other and the screen turns green, at least for this app. So I tilt, and it's green right there. That means it's more or less level, and you want the spacing in the circles kind of even. And then you spin the wheel little bits at a time to see how the rest of the area is. And if it's more or less green all the way through, then you have your piece more or less level. Now, if the circle is slightly off, you can adjust it, but for my liking, I think that's good. So we'll put this away, and we are more or less ready to start trimming. Now, this one's not going to have a foot, and so I have this angle more or less set up. I'm going to remove a little more of this and then just slightly concave this. So let's get my trusty 3D printed tool caddy, and then my trimming tools set up. And this piece is a little dry. I threw it a few weeks ago and it was just wrapped up with newspaper and plastic. And so I finally am getting around to trimming it. So I need to add a little water to this piece. So whenever your piece is dry, always add water to where you're trimming to help the clay hydrate, the trimmings come off as ribbons, and to not wear down your metal tools. All right, first thing I want to do is trim a little indent, a little pilot hole, so that I can apply downwards pressure as I trim. And this is a good habit to get into. I usually do it with most, if not all, my pieces I trim, especially if they're not secured down with anything. And so from there, I can apply downwards pressure with my ring finger, and now I can start trimming this exterior. So I'm going to be using the bigger trimming tool now. And the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to use the round side. I'm going to start trimming this edge right here and removing this excess. And because this is not going to have a foot, all I'm doing is trying to get this curve to more or less match it all the way through up to here. Let's go ahead and continue trimming this edge. And you can see my trimmings are coming off as more flaky than ribbons. So I definitely want to add water as I trim. And this is probably the driest I'd ever want a piece as I'm trimming. If it's any drier, those flakes get smaller and smaller, and it may just start creating clay dust. And clay dust is never a really good thing to breathe in. So we're going to go ahead and continue. And then I can see that the clay is coming off as ribbons. The downside is the clay kind of gets stuck to itself. So you just got to make sure to clean up your area a little more. Okay, so that angle's getting a little better. Let's flip to the flat side to kind of feather in the shape. Make it match. And back to this side. Pardon the neighbors upstairs. That sounds like they're dropping stuff on the floor. Okay, so right there, this angle looks pretty good. Just going back and forth between the two spots. Trying to get that nice soft roundness. And like I said, this is the easiest way to trim your moon vase. And this is a nice way to trim it, especially if you threw it very thin on the bottom. You don't want a foot. This is a good way to do it. And it just keeps the profile shape intact. Okay, so right there looks pretty good. Now I'm ready to start trimming the bottom, this inside. So I'm going to switch to my other trimming tool, but before I do that, I'm going to add some water. And so I'm not creating a foot. This is my exterior edge. This is more or less finished. I need to do some smoothing after, but I'm just going to add some moisture for now. But I just need to start trimming this inside. And so I'm going to make it slightly concave, like a very shallow crater. So I'm going to switch to my smaller trimming tool now. And I'm left-handed, so I'm going to start from the center and then work my way outwards towards 430. And then as I get to the edge, right here, you can decide if you want to have a flat edge to more or less do, I call this a false foot because you can't see it from the outside, or you can trim all the way to the edge and create more of a seamless crater. So I'm going to do the seamless crater, and definitely the most depth in the middle, and then have it slope up very gently as it gets outwards. So reduce the pressure as I work my way out. And then don't forget, tap every once in a while to make sure that the clay is not too thin. Have a decent amount of clay still. And because we're trimming with a chuck, my arms are elevated in the air. So you have to be very stable as you do this, or the clay can definitely, or your hands can definitely move. And then be careful, don't spin it too fast or the clay can pop off. So nice and slow. Trimmings are starting to fly everywhere. Definitely feel it fly on my legs. But we're going to get this finished. Switch to my other tool. Coat this with water. And now you can kind of see that crater, that little slope forming, especially from the front camera. And we're going to switch to this bigger one. So I'm trimming with my left hand again. So go a little deeper. And I like switching back and forth between these two tools, the smaller loop and the larger loop. Smaller for getting the initial work going, bigger to kind of go a little faster and cover more surface area. Some people like just using one, so depends on your style. Okay, and how much of a indent or crater you want is up to you. I'm doing a few passes because I want to make sure that this feels more or less even. Okay, definitely feel the vibration now, so I'm probably gonna stop there. Just gonna go ahead and clean this up. Because I added water, all the trimmings are getting stuck. So basically using the trimming tool as a rake to collect it and then push it out. And I can't really use the flat before this section because of course it's rounded, it won't fit. So just gotta use this guy. You can blow too as you trim. Get the trimmings removed. And I think that looks pretty good. I'm just going to soften this edge here, add a little more water, and do some final smoothing. Okay, and then the final smoothing, it can be done with only the sponge, it can be done with the sponge and the finger, it can be done with a rib. So depending on what I have available and how soft or hard the clay is, I switch and use tools, but whenever I don't have them available in front of me, I just use my fingers. These work really well because you can definitely see where you're smoothing. And then you just gotta buff everything out. And right there, that looks pretty good. And I just realized I don't have my mic set up on my main camera, so I apologize for the audio in this first part. I'm gonna go ahead, get this kind of popped off, switch to the next piece, and then get the mic on. So let's go ahead and switch it up. All right, so we got our next vase, and then the same steps in the setup. Make sure that this is even, flip it upside down. And we're gonna go ahead and center this using the bubble level. So we'll get it on top. And it's actually pretty good already. I'm just gonna shift a little bit and then start rotating. Okay, that looks pretty good. Take this off and then just spin to see how it feels. All right, that looks pretty good to me. Let's set up the barrier and let's get this trimmed. All right, so this one we're trimming with a foot, and so I'm gonna follow the same beginning steps. I'm gonna trim this little indent here to get that set up for my fingers. So actually I gotta shift this whole bucket because this is level, but this kind of moves. So what I need to do is find where it's off center. It's right there, and then move the bucket forward a little bit and then shift again. So that's the benefit of not wadding down your bucket. You can always shift your bucket or chuck until your piece is more or less centered. So I'm letting my finger touch the piece. That's where I need to shift it and then move it as necessary. So every time I touch my finger, that's the point that it's most off center. So I move it away from me. So I'll spend a few minutes getting this centered. Right there, that looks much better. So I got to retrim this little indent. As you can tell, that was pretty off. So just gonna make it a little wider. There we go. Feels good. Let's tap. Can't trim too deep, but we can go ahead and start getting this edge off. And so the first thing I want to do is remove this extra edge to make sure I have a true center. So I usually get a needle and then I mark where the edge is, where I want to start removing clay. And this is my new reference point. This edge is now centered in relation to where the piece is oriented. And so from there, I can now use my trimming tool to establish a new vertical centered edge. So trimming this inward, getting that nice and straight. And so that is my new foot. I'm establishing that vertical edge already. Okay, so this has a large slope. If you like that look, you can more or less keep it. But I want to get this slope even more inward. So I'm going to be taking clay off of here. Make sure there's enough clay. Okay, I don't feel too much vibration. So the first thing I do is I establish a new edge. So I take my tool, I make it parallel with this edge here, and I start trimming that down to then feather it into the clay below it. And so that will help me really bring in this vertical wall that the, oops. Let's get another one. So that basically added more wall to my vase and allows me to make the foot smaller. So I'm going to switch to the bigger tool because it's a little better for this purpose. And now I'm just going to trim this wall inward to establish my new width of my foot. And so you're going to keep doing this, trimming the bottom inward to establish a new wall, and then bringing this in until you get the foot height and width that you want. So I'm going to go ahead again to recap, find the angle that you want, go a little higher, and then trim that down until that new area that you're trimming matches the clay wall below it. So one thing is you got to make sure that your clay is thick enough to do this. So always tap, because you don't want to break through at the base, because if you break through, you can't really do much with that. Okay, and then once again switch, and let's go ahead and make this narrower. And so I'm gonna bring this in so I can make my foot a little less tall, because tall feet on a vase like this to me looks a little awkward. Okay, so that's looking a little cleaner. Pardon the airplane above. Sometimes using the flat edge to trim this is a little nerve-wracking, so you can use the round edge and then trim little increments going up. This clay's pretty wet. This one I just threw yesterday. So you trim up, and that way it's a little less nerve-wracking. The odds of you gouging the clay is less. Okay, and then I'm gonna do that one more time, maybe 2 more times. Tap to see if I have enough clay. Establish my new angle, and then trim down to make it match. And then of course adjust the top to remove all that excess overhanging clay. So like I said before, you do this as much or as little that you want. You don't really need to do this, but proportionally for my pot, I think this really helps the foot stand out a little more. Doesn't look so bulky.
If you want to see more ceramic videos, don't forget to like and subscribe. That way it helps grow the channel and you'll be able to see these videos as they're released every week.
We'll switch to the big tools, clean up the foot, and then we'll see if this is a good height. I might do it one more time. Let's adjust the shape. So feathering it down to make it match the overall bottom. Always tapping to make sure your thickness is good. You don't want to go too thin. And I think I'll do it one more time, just so the foot isn't so tall. This one I'm not going to trim as much. All right, right there, that angle more or less matches. Now Let's remove the excess, and this will be the final width. So I think this is a good height now. Sticky trimmings. Let's clean up the foot, and then we'll start digging the inside. Alright, I think that looks pretty good. Let's take off this lip from the top. Okay, and then final adjustments. For the exterior. Okay, and now we're ready to start trimming the inside. Okay, do some smoothing after. And my base is thin here. It definitely gets thicker as it goes outwards. So as I trim this, I'm actually going to stand up now. It's a little easier for me. And I'm going to start from the center and slowly work my way out. Because the clay is so soft, I got to make sure not to apply too much pressure or it can gouge. And try to clean up the trimmings as I go. And then I have one foot on the pedal still, so that I can stop the wheel as needed. But if that is harder for you to stay balanced, you can set your speed and then spin the wheel and stand on 2 feet. Okay, pretty thin there. So I'm going to stop trimming there, and I'm just going to get this outside a little more deep. Switch to the bigger tool. Lots of vibration, definitely through the bottom pretty thin. So I can't slope this down as much as I normally would. So I can go a little more on this outer edge because I know this outer edge is thicker. But this intersection, I definitely should not go too much deeper. Okay, let's clean it up. Got a little more of a slope. Establish this vertical line. Vertical edge. For the righties out there, you'd be trimming this at midnight like this. And then just beveling these corners a little. And then lastly, I'm going to throw in that undercut on the side, that roundness, just to give it a little more flair. Alright, and that looks more or less good. Let's go ahead and smooth it up and get these done. So a little bit of water. And then smooth, definitely round the bottom corners of the foot. Around this inside. around where I trimmed. Around and smooth the bottom. Perfect. And there we are. Here are the final 2 moon jars. The one without a foot and the one with a foot. And you may have been wondering what this texture is, and that is slip that was applied before I trimmed the foot. So if that's something that you guys want to see, let me know in the comments below and I can throw slip on this piece as well. And if you enjoyed the video, you like this kind of content, please share this channel with your friends, like and subscribe. It definitely helps to grow this channel and allows me to make more content for you guys. And if you want to see anything else in particular, don't be afraid to comment below. I love talking to you guys and interacting with all of you. And thank you for watching. And as always, I'll see you in the next video.